Some of the most expensive homes in the United States, mansions selling for $10 million or more, are built the same basic way as an ordinary suburban house, with a wood frame. This surprises a lot of people, since wealth is usually associated with permanence, and permanence is usually associated with stone, brick, or concrete. But walk onto the job site of almost any American megamansion under construction, and underneath the marble, the imported stone facade, and the floor-to-ceiling glass, there is a very good chance you will find studs, plywood sheathing, and dimensional lumber, the same basic materials used in a median-priced home a few hundred miles away. This is not a matter of cost-cutting. Wealthy buyers and their architects are not choosing wood framing because they cannot afford anything else. The reasons are closer to the ones that apply to any American home: speed, design flexibility, and a construction industry built almost entirely around wood-framed methods, from the architects who design with it to the contractors who know how to build with it to the codes that govern how it must be done. A concrete or steel structural system is possible at any price point, and some ultra-luxury homes do use it, particularly for large open spans of glass or dramatic cantilevered sections that a wood frame could not support on its own. But for most of the actual house, wood framing remains the default because it lets architects change a design mid-construction more easily. It goes up faster than masonry, and it is what the local trades are most experienced building. Where the money actually goes in a $10 million home is mostly in the finishes, not the structural bones. Solid wood trim in a luxury home might use a material like ebony, which can run over $100 per linear foot, compared to a few dollars per foot for standard molding in an ordinary home. Retractable glass walls, popular in high-end coastal properties for the way they open a room directly onto a view, can cost $500 to $600 per square foot to install. Even something as basic as drywall gets treated differently at this level. Standard drywall costs $1 to $2 per square foot, but in some ultra-luxury builds it is intentionally avoided in favor of poured concrete accent walls at $3 to $8 per square foot, purely for the material's look and feel rather than any structural necessity. None of this changes what the walls are built on. It changes what covers them. This distinction matters most when it comes to what a stone or brick exterior on a luxury home is actually doing. As with mid-priced American homes, many of these expensive stone-clad mansions use natural stone or brick purely as a decorative veneer applied to the outside of a wood-frame structure, not as a load-bearing material holding the building up. A home can look, from the street, like a solid stone fortress while structurally behaving exactly like a much cheaper wood-framed house underneath. The stone adds weight, cost, and visual permanence. It does not necessarily add the kind of structural fire resistance people often assume it does, because the roof, the interior framing, and often much of the exterior wall assembly beneath that stone veneer are still built from wood. This gap between appearance and structure became visible in a very direct way during the January 2025 Palisades fire in Los Angeles. The fire tore through Pacific Palisades, Topanga, and parts of Malibu, ultimately destroying 6,837 structures and becoming the most destructive wildfire in the city's history. Many of the homes lost were multi-million-dollar properties belonging to actors, musicians, and other high-profile residents, including homes reportedly worth well into the 7- and 8-figure range. These were not modest homes. Some had been recently remodeled, sat on carefully engineered bluff-top lots, or had been rebuilt after previous fires, including the 2018 Woolsey fire, which had already destroyed roughly 488 homes in the Malibu area alone. A high purchase price and expensive finishes did not, on their own, change the underlying fire vulnerability of a wood-framed structure sitting in the wildland-urban interface, the same zone of risk facing far less expensive homes nearby. The Palisades fire did not burn alone. It struck at the same time as the Eaton fire near Altadena and Pasadena, which destroyed 9,418 structures of its own, making the combined event one of the costliest wildfire disasters in American history in terms of the number of high-value structures lost in a single week. Together, the two fires destroyed far more valuable real estate in a matter of days than most California wildfire seasons destroy in an entire year, and they did so in neighborhoods where average home values numbered in the millions of dollars. This scale is part of why the rebuilding bottleneck has been so severe. thousands of high-value properties all needed permitting, engineering review, and skilled construction labor at the same time, in a construction market that was never sized to handle that volume of simultaneous, complex, custom rebuilds. The rebuilding process after the fire has exposed another part of the financial truth behind these expensive homes. 8 months after the Palisades fire, only a small fraction of destroyed properties had received permits to rebuild, and for many owners, the math has become genuinely difficult even with significant insurance coverage in place. One Malibu resident, whose home had been remodeled just 5 years before the fire, told reporters his construction costs to rebuild were running roughly double what his insurance policy actually covered. This is a pattern that shows up across price points, not just in modest homes. Rebuilding costs, driven by permitting delays, geological testing requirements on unstable bluff-top lots, and a construction industry stretched thin by simultaneous demand across thousands of properties, have consistently outpaced what standard insurance payouts provide, regardless of how expensive the original home was. Insurance for high-value homes in wildfire-prone areas like Malibu and Pacific Palisades has become its own distinct challenge, separate from the broader California insurance crisis affecting median-priced homes. Standard homeowners insurance policies, including California's FAIR Plan, typically cap coverage well below what it costs to rebuild a true luxury property with high-end finishes, custom architecture, and premium materials. A $1 million home built with high-end finishes, custom millwork, and imported materials can easily cost 50 to 60% more than that to actually rebuild to its original specification, which is exactly the kind of gap a standard homeowner's policy is not designed to cover. This gap has created an entire specialty insurance industry built specifically around homes like these. Carriers such as Chubb, PURE, AIG Private Client, Cincinnati Insurance, and Vault operate almost entirely outside the mass-market insurance world that covers most American homes, typically beginning coverage at homes with a replacement cost of $750,000 to $1 million and scaling up from there. These policies are usually sold only through independent agents, not directly to consumers, and they offer features standard policies do not, most notably what the industry calls guaranteed or extended replacement cost, meaning the insurer commits to paying the full cost of rebuilding a home to its original specification even if that cost ends up exceeding the policy's stated dollar limit. For a home in a wildfire-prone canyon where post-disaster demand can spike contractor and material costs well beyond normal levels, this single feature can be the difference between a homeowner recovering their full investment and absorbing a six-figure shortfall out of pocket. Even this specialty insurance market has not been immune to the pressure wildfire risk has placed on California's broader system. In Montecito, another wealthy, canyon-adjacent California community, Chubb aggressively renewed a wave of policies after several years of mounting losses, leaving longtime residents scrambling to find replacement coverage from other high-value carriers. Nationwide, once a major participant in the high-value insurance market, exited the sector entirely in 2024, consolidating the field around a smaller number of remaining specialty carriers. And in Pacific Palisades specifically, reporting following the January 2025 fires found that more than 1,600 homes in the neighborhood had already been non-renewed by a single major insurer in the year before the fire struck, meaning a meaningful share of the destroyed multi-million-dollar homes were relying on the FAIR Plan or a patchwork of replacement coverage rather than a standard high-value policy at the time of the fire. Expensive homes are not exempt from the same market dynamics, squeezing mid-priced homes across the state. They simply experience it through a different, higher-cost layer of the insurance system. This has pushed many owners of expensive homes towards specialized high-value insurance carriers, which price coverage based on actual rebuild cost rather than standard formulas, and which have themselves become more selective about wildfire-zone properties as claims have mounted. In some cases, homeowners have supplemented standard coverage with excess policies specifically designed to cover the gap between what a standard policy pays and what a custom, high-end rebuild actually costs. It's worth being clear about why wealthy buyers keep building and rebuilding in these specific locations despite the well-documented fire risk. Areas like the Pacific Palisades, Malibu, and the hills above Los Angeles offer a combination of ocean views, privacy, and proximity to the entertainment industry that is difficult to replicate anywhere else in the region. The same wildland-urban interface qualities that create fire risk, canyon terrain, dense natural vegetation, and separation from dense urban development are often exactly the qualities that make a property valuable and desirable in the first place. This creates a direct tension. The features that make a $10 million lot worth $10 million are frequently the same features that put a structure built on it at meaningfully higher wildfire risk than a comparable home in a denser, less scenic part of the city. This is not a new phenomenon in American wealth. During the Gilded Age of the late 1800s, some of the wealthiest families in the country built enormous summer estates along the New England coast, in places like Newport, Rhode Island. While some of these mansions were built from stone, a significant number were built in what architects call the shingle style, a design approach that used wood shingles and wood framing to create sprawling, elaborate homes, precisely because wood offered the design flexibility to build the sweeping rooflines, wraparound porches, and irregular floor plans the style called for. Even at the height of Gilded Age excess, some of America's wealthiest families chose wood over stone for the same reasons builders still choose it today: flexibility, speed, and the ability to build large, complex structures without the limitations that solid masonry construction imposes on a design. The pattern of expensive homes burning in exactly this kind of terrain is also not new, and it did not begin with the 2025 fires. On November 6, 1961, a wind-driven brush fire swept through the Bel Air neighborhood of Los Angeles, an area already known at the time for its concentration of expensive homes. Fueled by Santa Ana winds and record low humidity, the fire destroyed 484 homes and burned more than 6,000 acres in roughly 2 days, causing over $30 million in damage, an enormous sum for 1961. The homes lost belonged to some of the most famous and wealthy people in the country at the time, including actors Burt Lancaster, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Joan Fontaine, and Dennis Hopper, along with Nobel laureate chemist Willard Libby. Life magazine covered the disaster under the headline, "A Tragedy Trimmed in Mink," describing the scene as something close to a mass evacuation of the city's elite. Investigators later determined that wood shake and shingle roofs, common on homes throughout the neighborhood at the time, were a major factor in how quickly the fire spread from house to house, as burning shingles were carried by the wind and landed on nearby roofs, igniting new fires ahead of the main blaze. In direct response, the city of Los Angeles banned wood shake and shingle roofs in new construction and introduced some of the strictest brush clearance requirements in the country. These changes mirror, almost exactly, the kind of code updates California adopted decades later after fires like the 2003 Cedar Fire. The 1961 Bel Air Fire is, in effect, an earlier version of the same story playing out in Pacific Palisades and Malibu today, an affluent, canyon-adjacent neighborhood, built for privacy and views rather than fire safety, burning rapidly under Santa Ana wind conditions, followed by a wave of regulatory change arriving only after the damage had already been done. More than 60 years and 2 major regulatory overhauls later, the fundamental tension between where wealthy Americans choose to build and how vulnerable that terrain is to fire has not been resolved. It has simply repeated itself at a larger scale, with more expensive homes and higher rebuilding costs. At the very top of today's luxury real estate market, above the $10 million range, and into homes priced at $50 million or more, some builders have started moving away from wood frame construction entirely. Speculative mega mansions built for the ultra-wealthy in areas like Bel Air and Beverly Hills have increasingly used structural steel and poured concrete for at least part of the build, particularly for homes with massive cantilevered decks, multi-story glass walls, or underground levels that a wood frame could not support. These homes represent a small fraction of the overall luxury market, but they show that when the budget is large enough and the architectural ambitions extreme enough, builders do move to steel and concrete. The vast majority of multi-million-dollar homes, even genuinely impressive ones, still fall well short of that threshold and still rely on the same wood-framed structural system used across the rest of the country. Some ultra-high-end builders have started responding to this tension directly, using construction methods that go well beyond standard wood framing. This includes steel-reinforced structural elements, fire-resistant roofing and siding materials, tempered in multi-pane glass designed to resist radiant heat, enclosed eaves and vents designed to block embers, and defensible landscaping maintained well beyond the minimum required by code. These upgrades add real cost on top of an already expensive build, but they represent a genuine shift in how some luxury construction approaches wildfire risk, treating it as an engineering problem to be addressed directly rather than something a high price tag and desirable location can simply outrun. The parallel to the 1961 Bel Air Fire holds here too. After that fire, insurers did not simply raise rates and move on. The disaster directly shaped decades of subsequent building code and land use policy in Los Angeles, precisely because the losses were concentrated in such a visible, high-value community that the political pressure to act was hard to ignore. The 2025 fires appear to be following a similar arc, with California's insurance commissioner's 2024 regulatory changes and increased scrutiny of high-value carrier practices arriving in the aftermath of losses concentrated in some of the most prominent neighborhoods in the state. In both cases, it was not the raw dollar value of the losses alone that drove policy change, but the visibility of who was affected and how directly the disaster exposed a mismatch between assumed safety and actual risk. There is also a perception gap worth addressing directly, since it shapes how buyers and the public evaluate risk at this price level. A $10 million price tag creates an impression of exceptional quality and durability, and in many respects, that impression is accurate. High-end homes generally use better-grade lumber, more rigorous engineering review, and higher quality finish work than a median-price production home. But none of that changes the fundamental physics of how a wood-framed structure interacts with wildfire. Higher-grade materials burn differently in some respects, and better-built homes with modern fire-resistant detailing genuinely do perform better in a wildfire than older, poorly maintained structures. But the base assumption that a higher price automatically means a fire-resistant structure is not accurate, and the aftermath of the Palisades and Eaton fires made that gap visible to a very public audience, since the homes lost included some of the most recognizable and expensive residential real estate in the country. This has started to shift how some luxury buyers and their architects think about risk before they build, rather than only after a fire has already occurred. Where a decade ago, a $10 million home's fire protection might have consisted of little more than a fire-rated roof and standard code compliance, some architects working in high-risk zip codes now treat wildfire resistance as a design requirement discussed at the very start of a project, alongside the layout, the views, and the finishes. This includes decisions about landscaping, driveway width for fire truck access, water storage on the property itself, and the specific assemblies used around windows, eaves, and vents, since these details determine whether embers carried ahead of a fire front can ignite a structure long before the flames themselves ever arrive. The truth behind America's $10 million wood mansions, then, is less about deception and more about a mismatch between appearance and structure that applies across almost the entire American housing market, just at a much higher price point. A stone facade, a marble entryway, and a seven-figure interior renovation do not change what is holding the house up, and they do not automatically change how that house performs in a wildfire. Where the money genuinely does change outcomes is in the small, but growing segment of ultra-luxury construction that treats fire resistance as its own line item, alongside the marble and the ebony trim, rather than assuming that expensive materials alone provide protection they were never actually designed to offer.